Chapter 31. Culmination 7-7. Chapter 11. Culmination 7-7. 1997, 1998. Percy is 21 and 34. Severus is 36. Harry is 17. And Dumbledore no longer lives. March 1998. Percy, in this lifetime, keeps a running to-do matrix in his mind, like he would do in any lifetime. Though over the past decade, his occlumency skills have progressed to the point where his mental matrix exists in multiple dimensions, in real time, and in a part of his mind that is almost physical. Despite Percy's prodigious proclivity for organization, the knowledge that he has left far too many things to the wayside is ever present, an oily film that drips great garbs of stressful regret onto the floor of his mental library whenever he accesses his shields. It is all he can do to ignore the sight of the scrolls and scrolls of the plans he'd once made. He'd always had a vague idea, for example, that he would be the one to heroically ferry Muggleborns out of the country, or that he'd find a more effective way to neutralize the Death Eater recruiting efforts than by reporting to Tonks whenever he heard news of a proposed meeting. There's an entire section of his matrix devoted to his family. He'd wanted to find some way to check in on Charlie, to ensure that the twins were still taking the necessary precautions, to confirm that Bill and Auntie Muriel hadn't killed each other due to their shared residence in Shell Cottage, that his parents were, well. Of these goals, he purposefully rarely lingers, knowing that to draw any attention to the errant Weasleys running around the country would do more harm than good. But these goals seem to throb with palpable regret every time he considers them, particularly after seeing how his inattention has put both Ron and Ginny at the center of the ensuing danger. There are his old classmates, whom he tries never to think of, and the Order and Hogwarts students, and the Hogwarts professors, and the growing subset of ministry employees who are beginning to be bold enough to mutter openly about their discontent with the substandard leadership abilities of those put forcefully in charge, and the daily prophet staff that recently went on strike, and the snatchers that have begun to think that capturing any more Muggleborns is a fruitless effort, and therefore they should be enticed with higher rewards. All of these people have their own separate scrolls in Percy's mental library. The moment that he leaves Ginny in Parkinson Manor, under numerous wards, Tom and Voldemort be damned if they take him to task for his concern. Percy shoves all of those scrolls to the ground, where they sit untidily in a heap. The ghost of Madame Pince shrieks in his mind, but he banishes her with a rough shake of his head. Ruthlessly, he forces himself to cross off objectives, plans and counterplans and speculations, and everything in between. The Dark Lord has told Percy that he will summon Harry to him, soon. The last inert Horcrux has been destroyed, and Percy has given the trio the items from Dumbledore's will and told Harry of the horrid part he has yet to play. Keep Ginny alive. Allow Voldemort to kill Harry. Allow Tom to kill Voldemort. Kill Tom. Everything else is immaterial. Of course, if Percy has time, there are second-tier objectives to consider. Organizing Tonks and the rest of the Order, ensuring the Hogwarts students are kept safely in their beds, thinking through the best way to keep Severus alive. Number Percy shakes his head again, firmly, dislodging the scrolls that began to hover hopefully in his mental library. Severus will remain alive if he can play his part for a few past days. Ginny will remain alive if Percy watches her carefully. Neither Tom nor Voldemort will risk angering Percy, particularly over a pureblood witch. Percy has far too many powerful witches in his life that would murder him with a single curse if he dared even think anything about the inferiority of witches. But he knows that Bellatrix Lestrange was the only witch granted the dubious honor of the dark mark on her arm, and Tom has never once expressed any interest nor positive sentiment in any woman, ever. If Ginny keeps her head down and her mouth shut, she should survive. She will survive. Voldemort, Harry, Tom. That is all that Percy must think about. Voldemort, for his part, seems keen to ensure that Percy does precisely that. For the next 2 days, the Dark Lord bids him to return each morning to Parkinson Manor and keeps him so late in the night that it is all he can do, each night, to fall exhausted into bed and try to eke out a few hours of sleep. It narrows Percy's world only to Voldemort. Severus and Tom are both nowhere to be found, and though Percy tries to contact Severus via their linked notebooks, his book remains cold and inert. Percy tries not to wonder where Tom is, least of all because if he starts thinking about Ginny's shocking news that Tom was lurking around Hogwarts, he wants to break something, and demanding the truth from Tom is not anywhere close to the top of his priority queue. Of course, that was where Tom had been going. Percy knows, better than most, that all versions of Tom are obsessed with Hogwarts. Percy should have honestly found it strange that his Tom had not insisted on seeing the castle at the earliest opportunity. Was that where Tom had been sleeping, eating, lingering like a ghost among the students, pretending to go to class, walking the grounds? Had Myrtle seen him? Had Severus? But Parkinson Manor is not the hub of activity that Percy had thought it would be, either. Voldemort sets Percy to brewing a few emergency potions. Grumpily, Percy agrees, wondering if he can swipe a few and satisfy at least one of his intentionally deprioritized objectives, and asks him to tally the strength of the werewolves, giants, and centaurs that had pledged fealty to their new lord. Percy spends most of the next morning wrangling a series of seemingly unrelated tasks dictated to him by Voldemort, to dismiss the extra snatchers, to cancel the upcoming weekly Death Eater meeting, to renew his imperious on pews, to ensure the Muggleborns within the ministry are still captive. These tasks are familiar to Percy, and so he completes them quickly and competently. Returning to the manor, he looks around him cautiously. He expects there to be Death Eaters practicing their dueling or final elemental rituals conducted to augment the Dark Lord's power, or at the very least a sycophantic show of strength. However, the Dark Lord seems content to busy himself with some private research in the Parkinson Manor library. After a miserly lunch provided by an anxious Cypress, Percy hovers awkwardly in the doorway of the library until the Dark Lord motions him inside with an abrupt, almost irritated jerk of his head. The Dark Lord has changed over the last year. Percy thinks to himself uncomfortably as Voldemort bends his head over a thick tome as if he were a normal wizard. Percy had taken a seat at one of the small tables nearby, and while the Dark Lord hadn't revealed what he was studying in so many words, he hadn't prevented Percy from catching a glimpse of the title, either. Voldemort is reviewing the ancient ways of channeling magic, clearly thinking about methods to obviate the need for a wand entirely. Percy can barely reconcile this Dark Lord with the one from the horrid Samhain, or even the one that tore open an entire village of Muggles with the strength of his magic. It isn't that this Dark Lord had softened. Percy is still very aware of the Dark Lord's power, of his ability to be cruel, of his propensity for quick, impulsive violence, but that he seems far less interested in wreaking havoc than he had before. His interests seem more academic, more targeted. And perhaps what is really strange is that Percy is alone in this room, reading quietly alongside the darkest wizard of their time. Percy chooses a book on Hogwarts, which he figures he can justify with a variety of excuses as needed. At times, the Dark Lord shares something he's learned, and Percy responds as intelligently as he can. And on two separate occasions, they have what could almost be termed an academic discussion of some weight. Percy never would have imagined that this is what Voldemort is like when he is alone. Percy never would have guessed he is so much like Tom, like an older Tom. Percy never would have guessed that he would be so comfortable in the Dark Lord's presence as the sun begins to set, dispatching brilliant golden streaks to peer through the stained glass windows of the library and remind its occupants that the day is nearly done. Percy supposes that it was important for him to witness the Dark Lord's depravity so often. Had this been the only version of Voldemort that Percy had ever met, he might be less reconciled to his mission to destroy him. And Severus had reminded him, the last time that Percy had written a similar thought in the notebook, that there are many shades of the Dark Lord, and he chooses carefully what to show to each follower. This version of Voldemort may not be an entire lie, but Percy cannot make the mistake of forgetting what other versions of him lay dormant. And it is true that this version of the Dark Lord is far more frightening than the version that Percy remembers from the previous timeline, or so he admits uncomfortably to himself the first night, after the Dark Lord has released him and bid him to return in 5 hours. This version of the Dark Lord has had the majority of his soul destroyed, but his mind remains intact, and sharp, his magic tight and refined, his power unquestionably great. This version of the Dark Lord is one that Percy can very well imagine tightening his grip over society, meter by miserable meter, without leaving any room for opposition. Cut off from the ministry, from Severus, from Tom, it is all Percy can do to pace nervously around Parkinson Manor, roaming the halls and peeking into the doors. He spends much of the next morning speaking to Ginny, who tells him in a series of vague half-truths about the events of her year. Caros, Cruciatus, and the resurrected Da. Percy understands better now why so many students had come up to Ginny and thanked her for her service in the war. He wishes he could tell her how proud he is of her and hopes she can read it from his face, from the way that he scolds her, pompous and overblown, like the caricature of himself that Fred and George so often imitated. The day reminds him of what it had been like in Hogwarts during the Owls or the Newts, which were traditionally held as week-long exams. There was always a time, a few days in, when Percy would feel at odds with himself, a bit at loose ends, 3 or 4 examinations completed competently and 3 or 4 examinations upcoming. There is the same insubstantial cast to the day, a kind of languishing haziness, undercut by the keen blade of knowledge that the most difficult trials are yet to come. Percy cannot relax, both because he is still terribly aware of what he must still do, Harry, Voldemort, Tom, and also because the Dark Lord watches him carefully and silently. If Tom does not defeat the Dark Lord, Percy will be forced to swear eternal fealty to Voldemort in a way that will be far more binding than the mark already branded into his arm. Percy can barely eat lunch nor take tea, though he forces himself to do both, knowing that he will need strength and energy to survive another languid afternoon in the library with the Dark Lord. But only an hour after he'd forced himself to tuck away into a plate of roast chicken and beans. Roast chicken. As if it were the middle of December, rather than the beginning of March. As if Narcissa Malfoy wouldn't have served a tasteful spring salad. And drained an entire mug of English breakfast tea. He feels the Dark Lord's magic roiling angrily through the manor, and he knows that the afternoon will not include scholarship. First comes the sudden shock and relief of seeing Severus in the parlor, where he has heard his instructions from the Dark Lord for the past 2 days. Percy cannot help but search for a hint or explanation in Severus' taciturn face, but the other man only looks at him evenly. In fact, his face is so expressionless that Percy begins to buzz with worry, understanding almost instinctively that they are in a dangerous position indeed. Next comes understanding, as Lucius stumbles through the door, followed by the Dark Lord. Percy tenses. He's intensely aware of Severus' magic, so familiar, so proximal, so vulnerable. If the Dark Lord is here with Lucius, then he is here for the Elder Wand, and Severus may be minutes from death despite all of his prowess as a spy. Severus takes a minuscule step away from Percy, disguising it as an uncomfortable shifting of his feet at the sight of his old friend. Percy knows that Severus will disavow him until the very end, and he would need to do the same, so that one may survive in case one must die. But even that small additional distance seems to loom between them. Percy has the unwelcome sensation that he is standing at the edge of a cliff. The Dark Lord stands silently for a few seconds, watching his 3 followers with a strange, curious smile stretched across his flat, reptilian face. They have all betrayed the Dark Lord in their own ways. Percy does not know how he found himself here, in company with Lucius and Severus. A lesson, perhaps, or a sign of the Dark Lord's esteem. Would the Dark Lord have been similarly interested in him if Tom hadn't been interested in him first? Or perhaps all it means is that he will die too, that the Dark Lord has discovered any of his treacheries. This thought, while unpleasant, is oddly preferably to the image of Percy standing by as Severus dies alone. "Sit, my friends," Voldemort orders graciously, but an order nevertheless, and they all perch on their respective seats, angled in deference toward the Dark Lord. Percy finds himself on the Dark Lord's right, a position he has never been granted in such a meeting before, and Lucius, directly opposite the Dark Lord in the position of intruder, gives him a sharp, evaluatory glance when he notices Percy's elevated position. "Expelliarmus," snaps Voldemort suddenly, and Severus flinches visibly as his wand is torn reluctantly from his grip. Percy cannot help but find his attention drawn to Severus' slender, scarred fingers, which he knows from experience are surprisingly delicate and lithe. Severus also carries one of Percy's wardstones in his pocket and maintains a low-level shield at all times, as he taught Percy to do long ago. A simple disarming charm should not have relieved him so easily of his wand. "There we are, Lucius," Voldemort croons, cradling Severus' wand in his hands. "Now I have your wand, and his as well. Surely that satisfies the criteria as Grindelwald detailed them, or shall I go ahead and kill you both now? I am sure you would both give your lives in service, so that I may control the Elder Wand." "My lord," begin both Lucius and Severus in unison, while all Percy can do is sit mutely in his horror. With a dismissive glance to his left, Severus continues in a stronger tone, "My lord, you cannot imagine I have been concealing wand ownership of Dumbledore's wand from you." "Perhaps unknowingly," corrects Voldemort lightly. "Isn't that what you said, Lucius?" Lucius pinkens slightly at the force of Severus' glare. Percy stays quiet, watching, marveling at Severus' abilities. Percy does not know how to react, would not know how to react, not in such a taut environment. But he knows that each of Severus' gestures are intentionally rendered, though each seems genuine. Severus' feelings of betrayal are clear in the tense ridges in his shoulders and arms, and his anxiety is communicated clearly each time he swallows against a dry mouth. None of his movements suggest prior knowledge of the wand. "My lord," Lucius says carefully, though he seems to lose some of his bravery at the darkly dismissive look that Voldemort slants in his direction. Percy starts at the hoarse quality of Lucius' voice, nothing like his standard velvet tones, and Lucius flushes even further. His robes do look expensive, but not new, and his long, blonde hair has lost some of its characteristic luster. The real change in Lucius, however, is the strange, cringing deference that captures his tongue hostage, and Percy suddenly feels a shocking well of sorrow for the downfall of this proud, impetuous man, though of course Lucius has committed several atrocities and personally put Percy's loved ones at risk. If Percy survives, he supposes he can think through why he is able to pity men like Lucius. "My lord, I was wrong to flee," whispers Lucius hoarsely, visibly gathering his courage. He bears some of the characteristic signs of Cruciatus, his limbs trembling softly and dark bruises gathering like thunderclouds under his pale, glinting eyes. "My son, I feared for his life. I was fearful, my lord, and I should not have forsaken you. You should have offered your son to me," whispers Voldemort, his red eyes flashing with disdain. His voice is low and cold, and his magic gathers over the rug, the dark, oily taint of it heavy and viscous, as if their feet are moored in wet sand. Lucius flinches violently, but nods brokenly, and Percy has to avert his eyes in shame and pity. "My lord, correct me if I do not understand. Lucius is claiming that either I or his son has ownership over the Elder Wand," Severus interjects. His voice is heavy with skeptical derision, as if he had not been the one to fetch the wand from the tomb himself. "But the boy fled. Surely that is a sign of his guilt." Percy had always vaguely wondered whether Severus would sacrifice Lucius for his own life, when the time came to it, despite any debt that Severus claimed to owe the other man. Surely that Severus was willing to pin the blame on Draco suggested that all bets were off in this new round of the fragile game they all played, day after day. "If my son is guilty, he need only be defeated," Lucius says intently, regaining some of his previous strength to combat Severus' move. "He need not be killed." Grindelwald was very clear. So Lucius had taken what he'd learned from Severus and Percy and managed to find more of the truth. Percy leans back, considering tensely how to twist this narrative to their advantage. He would hope that Voldemort would not kill Severus, not with Lucius disgraced and Bellatrix dead, not if Grindelwald so clearly was defeated by Dumbledore, but not killed. Lucius is likely beyond saving. He will be punished for the sin of desertion, regardless of what knowledge he brought back to his lord. Which of the remaining outcomes is optimal, and what can Percy do to influence the situation? Percy knows that Draco is with the trio, of course, but is it better to have the Dark Lord think that Harry or Draco has ownership of the wand? Or given that they are together, perhaps it would not matter if the Dark Lord will bend his mind toward finding either of them regardless of what Percy says. Once Harry dies, Voldemort will have ownership anyway, points out a voice that sounds suspiciously like Myrtle, floating through Percy's mind. He keeps his face carefully blank as he considers this. Percy's best guess has been that Harry needs the wand to have a chance at survival with the Dark Lord, but equally so, he believes that Harry must be defeated at the hands of the Dark Lord. Narcissa Malfoy had lied to the Dark Lord about whether Harry Potter was dead, which Percy hopes implies that there was some way that Harry will dodge death yet again. But can it be considered a true defeat if Harry goes willingly and knowingly to his death, or if he does not even die? Percy's true fear, his secret, private fear, is that if Harry does not die, the Dark Lord will not be truly defeated. Percy glances at the Dark Lord. Percy's magic has long since accepted the authority and dominion of the Dark Lord's power. Even with the Elder Wand, Percy cannot imagine that Harry will survive. But he reminds himself, miracles follow Harry wherever he goes. Is the right thing to do to take the wand from Harry? But a stupid, hopeful, childish part of him squashes the thought, as he's done innumerable times before. This quixotic part of him believes stubbornly that Harry deserves a chance to survive the Dark Lord. This part of him still believes in fairy tales, in unbeatable wands, in miracles, in the legend of the boy who lived. He hates this part of himself sometimes, but the alternative seems so unbearably sad that he cannot contemplate it. Harry aside, Percy thinks to himself as Lucius reveals haltingly that he had secured Grindelwald as a gift for the Dark Lord, so that the Dark Lord may question him personally. Percy does not want the Dark Lord to attempt to find Draco. That is clear. If Voldemort sets his will toward finding Draco, he will do so quickly, now that the teenagers are housed only behind their own wards, and not the Fidelius, unless Andromeda has managed to levy the same black family protections that Sirius had called upon earlier that year. If Voldemort finds Draco, he will pluck the truth of the past year from his mind, and Percy will be killed prematurely, and everything would have been for naught. It occurs to me that Grindelwald would have a particular motivation to say such a thing, says Voldemort lightly. Percy can tell at a glance that the opportunity to torture Grindelwald has pleased him. Without the wand, we cannot be certain that he is not still the true owner. And as you claim it was not you nor your son that broke into Dumbledore's tomb, we are not able to resolve the issue with any clarity. Lucius pales, understanding the implicit threat in Voldemort's words, but Percy's mind is already turning as the constraints of the problem become clear to him. Well, Percy cannot help but say, it is a matter of logic, my lord. He blanches at the oily slick of Voldemort's displeased attention and adds quickly, praying the Dark Lord will not take offense at his accidental condescension, as you have pointed out to us in your wisdom. If death is required to transfer wand ownership, then you need only kill Grindelwald, and neither Severus nor Draco could be a potential owner of the wand, for Dumbledore never could have owned it. He pauses, waiting either for a curse or a challenge, but the Dark Lord only purses his mouth and gives a short, abrupt nod. If defeat in a duel is the primary consideration, however, then I think it most likely that Draco won the wand's fealty, though in your brilliance you have also defeated Severus to cover both scenarios. Lucius gives Percy a poignant look of betrayal, which Percy bears stoically. His plan is to turn the attention back to Grindelwald and let Voldemort dispose of his predecessor, and save them all some trouble. Percy is already opening his mouth to continue when the Dark Lord speaks again. And where is dear Draco? Voldemort turns his full attention on Lucius, who quails at the question. Surely the head of the Malfoy family can locate its heir easily. You told me you were bringing me the wand, Lucius, and yet all you have brought me is a captured wizard. I have tried, gasps Lucius, sweat beading on his pale, lined forehead. Percy does not envy him this awful position. For Severus to decide to sacrifice an old friend is one thing. For Lucius to decide to sacrifice his son is quite another. My lord, I have tried to locate Draco. He is under powerful wards. My lord, I fear the Order has him in captivity. Percy cannot help but flick a look towards Severus, whose face remains stony and impassive. Percy's best guess is that Lucius had heard rumors, or seen outright, that Draco was in the company of the Golden Trio. The safest course of action would then be to insist Draco had been taken captive. My lord, I have not heard of such a thing, though I suppose it is possible that he is in the Order headquarters, guarded by Fidelius, says Severus smoothly. If that is the case, we will be unable to fetch him until we can bring down the Order entirely, beginning with Potter's death. Percy screams in his head in frustration. The Dark Lord's pursed lips and the coiled spring of his magic suggest that he is not content with this answer, not when the wand could be so easily within reach. Percy's baby sister is in the same house as the Dark Lord, and his brother is with Harry right now, and every day that the Dark Lord delays is another day for something to go wrong. Severus cannot say anything that would appear too openly self-serving, not when he must not arouse any suspicion about his motivations, but that shackles him from sufficiently convincing the Dark Lord of a more beneficial course of action. That, or Severus cannot see what Percy can see, which would be a worrisome fact indeed. It may be up to Percy to salvage this situation. "My lord," Percy says into the silence, his heart quickening. His palms grow sweaty despite themselves, but with all of the practice of the last year, Percy holds his head high. What he is about to say is tremendously risky, but he suddenly, abruptly understands something that he feels instinctively that Harry has always known. Sometimes one needs to take risks, to leap without looking ahead, if one has any chance at all at defeating a giant like Voldemort. "My lord, I believe there may be something we have not fully considered." Voldemort's attention snaps to Percy, and Percy feels the creeping presence of the Dark Lord in his mind. This type of intrusion is normal, of course, and Percy feeds the tendril some of his unease as he answers, "My lord, I think it not unlikely Draco received ownership, though unknowingly, of the Elder Wand," Percy says carefully, not looking at Severus. If Severus disagrees with Percy's plan, he would make it clear in the dark glower of his eyes, and Percy barely has an idea of what he will say next. He cannot improvise further. But someone stole the wand from Dumbledore's tomb. It was not me, nor Severus, and Lucius claims it was not him either. It could not have been Draco. He was a good student, but he is not a powerful enough wizard to dismantle the wards on Dumbledore's tomb. What are you implying? Voldemort demands, all of his attention on Percy, who shudders slightly from the force of it. What if Dumbledore planned to give Potter the wand? Percy whispers. The boy was there in the tower. They had returned from a private mission where the boy left the grounds. He chased Severus away, howling with anger, "My lord, Dumbledore could have left him instructions on how to enter his tomb, on how to retrieve the Elder Wand." Lucius draws himself up to his full height and snaps, "If you are implying that my son aided Potter against the Dark Lord." "Most likely, Draco knew nothing," Percy continues, over Lucius' anger. If Lucius cannot see that Percy is helping him, that is his own funeral. But if Draco did have the wand, perhaps Dumbledore told Potter that he had to defeat Draco. Perhaps Draco was seeking the boy to bring him to you, my lord, and Potter saw his opportunity. Why would Draco have sought the boy? Lucius scoffs incredulously. Because the Malfoy family was in disgrace. Severus stirs himself long enough to snap. Draco cares strongly for the honor of the Malfoy name, as we both know, Lucius. Lucius subsides angrily, and Severus continues, looking carefully at the Dark Lord. "He would have known you were looking for him, my lord, and as he was Potter's schoolmate, he may have had an idea of where the boy was hiding and thought that by bringing him to you, he would recompense some of the shame from Lucius' failings. All it would take was for Potter to defeat Draco in a duel, and the wand ownership would be complete. But Severus tells me that Potter's skill with magic is questionable at best," says Voldemort thoughtfully, and more than a bit dangerously. But Percy can tell that this version of events has caught hold in Voldemort's mind, that the idea that Dumbledore would have prepared for his death, and passed the knowledge of the Elder Wand to Harry, that Draco could have feasibly found Harry Potter, knowing his father was disgraced. Severus inclines his head. "My lord, I would point out that Harry Potter has defeated Draco once before, during their 6th year. His skill with magic is not notable, but neither is Draco's, my lord." Lucius looks almost comically torn between the instinctive desire to support his son and the uncomfortable knowledge that Percy and Severus are, in their own way, protecting Draco. Percy ignores Lucius, focusing instead on Severus, his dark hair falling into his face as he leans forward in his chair. So Severus has decided to bolster Percy's plan. Whether he supports Percy's improvisation or not is irrelevant at this point. By speaking, Percy has set them on a course, and they can now only hope that they remain straight and true. My lord, you do not need the Elder Wand to defeat the boy, Percy continues enticingly. It seems more likely than not that he has the ownership anyway, and if you kill him, you will have its power regardless. P.O.er that he knows not, Voldemort says quietly, almost to himself. Percy swallows and says nearly silently, so that Voldemort leans toward him despite himself, a trick that Percy had learned from Tom. There is no power that you do not know, my lord. What if Dumbledore planned this as a distraction, knowing you'd learn of the wand? What if he never had it at all? My lord, he was defeated by a sixth-year student. If he had the Elder Wand, surely he would have been able to protect himself. Percy has watched Tom more than once be distracted by a thought by another, batting at the ideas in the air like a cat warring with center flies. Voldemort is no different. His eyes gleam at this new idea, and Percy can almost visibly see how Draco leaves his mind, to be replaced with this new angle of Dumbledore's infinite cunning. Mouth dry, Percy adds another hook for Voldemort to catch himself on, another fly to buzz loudly through the air. I have suspected that perhaps Dumbledore was already dying. Percy intentionally looks only at the Dark Lord, feeling Severus' gaze scald over his cheek. Percy cannot look at Severus, cannot doubt himself now. He is acting purely on instinct honed by several years of misleading Tom, on instinct that he has understood the undercurrents of the room and can prevent all of them from capsizing if he acts very carefully to steer their vessel towards safety. With the mood that Voldemort is in, he is liable to kill Lucius and Severus both. Their lives are only contingent on Voldemort believing that Grindelwald was telling the truth about the wand, which Percy would not rely on. And what Percy had said to Severus still feels true. Voldemort is afraid of dueling with Harry, afraid of raising his wand against him. What if he believes that Harry has the Elder Wand and changes his plan? At long last, after 11 lengthy years, they have Voldemort exactly where they need, and Percy has the chance to arrange a final confrontation without a violent, unpredictable final battle. First steps first, and then the second, he's been telling himself for years, and now at long last he must make the second move. My lord, his hand was blackened and cursed, Percy says quietly, his attention focused fully on the Dark Lord, who stares back at him forcefully, their gazes joined like thick strands of rope twisting between them. He must have been weakened by his confrontation with you at the ministry. My lord, he asked me for many options to alleviate pain, Severus interjects. Percy wants to sag in relief, but keeps himself firm, crossing his toes anxiously inside his boots. Whether this had been the right approach or not was now irrelevant, given that Percy had begun and could not retract his words, so he is thankful for Severus' support. He was ill for much of the year, as I reported to you. What are you trying to say? Lucius bursts out. That he wanted my son to become the master of the Elder Wand. Percy gives Lucius a cool, dismissive glance that he'd first learned from the other man. Think, Lucius. He knew that your son was trying to kill him. Why did he not stop him? He barely resisted when Severus and Draco caught him on the tower. He wanted to be a martyr, my lord. If he died quietly in his sleep, it would have had half the impact it did otherwise. He could have engineered the situation, knowing the wand would pass to a sixth-year student rather than Severus, so that it would be easier for Potter to win. And Percy adds hurriedly, sensing his time to speak has almost ended. Think about who he has targeted for suspicion. My lord, he made you distrust your two most powerful followers, based only on a myth of a wand that may not even exist. We cannot forget, we have only Grindelwald's word that his wand was that of legend. Here Percy ends, his chest heaving, bowing his head both to show respect and to avoid revealing his face. The silence that stretches on is one of the longest of Percy's life, and he waits in agony to see if the Dark Lord has bought the story or if they will be punished for any of their parts in it. Perhaps the wand was never in his tomb, says Voldemort finally, and Percy tenses, sensing a victory. Voldemort is too caught up in the idea of the Elder Wand to accept Percy's hints that it may be only myth. The next best outcome is for him to think Dumbledore or Harry has the wand and forget about Draco entirely. He wanted to play me for a fool. Nobody can play you like a fool, my lord, dares Percy, and Severus makes a murmured noise of assent. Now Severus, his voice like silvered smoke. Percy is reminded that Severus too has known many versions of the Dark Lord, that the Dark Lord trusts him above all other Death Eaters. Kill the boy tomorrow. My lord, the prophecy, the wand, the legacy of the Chosen One. They are all inventions of Dumbledore intended to protect the boy from your attention. You need nothing to defeat the boy save your own magic. And then Lucius, angry and confused, but with the career instincts that Percy has always admired in him, speaks with some of his characteristic velvet. My lord, I will devote my life to finding you the Elder Wand once the boy is dead, in apology for my cowardice. Voldemort surveys all three of them, Severus, Lucius, and Percy, and finally he nods. Tomorrow we kill Harry Potter, he says, and Percy feels a bubble of relief, fragile and shining, begin to grow inside him. Asterisk Severus manages to escape with Percy for precisely 15 minutes after they are dismissed, cautiously triumphant, though still tensely on edge. They take quick, hurried steps out of Parkinson Manor, huddling together outside a large beech tree, while Severus lights a Muggle cigarette and pretends to smoke it. We all have vices, he says when he sees Percy's look. This has long since been an alleged one of mine. Now quickly, we do not have much time. The Dark Lord will summon me to him soon. Severus. He may still decide to kill me, Severus says, as if it were inevitable, the truth harsh and stark and terrible. Forestalls Percy's instinctive objection with an ironic twist of his lips. There is nothing either of us can do, and we need not waste time confirming that. You have done admirably to redirect his focus to the boy. That is your task now, and you must not falter. So why are we here? Percy snaps, anxious and heartsick, and still reeling from the shock of the last hour. To say our goodbyes. Severus gives Percy a softly amused look, which is somehow more intimate than a goodbye truly would be. I have studied the stone the entire year, he says, cupping his hands around the cigarette to mask his words, or perhaps lend an air of authenticity to the disguise. There is no elixir of life. Percy blinks. His hand sneaks to his pocket, where the Dementor's small grey stone is safely ensconced with a light sticking charm. What? The properties that we derived for the Philosopher's Stone, the ones in the exercises we completed, Severus says impatiently. They do not match the stone's reality. After the disappointing discussion with Flamel, Percy had thrust the idea of immortality from his mind entirely, choosing to think of the stone only as a receptacle of gold. Severus had been ferrying gold to him at regular intervals, which he'd obediently passed along to Tonks. You wanted to be immortal? Percy asks, stupidly. When Severus had brushed past him as they exited and skillfully redirected them past the apparition point to the outside grounds, Percy had thought he'd scold Percy for the twisted, convoluted series of ideas he'd given the Dark Lord. At Severus' frown, he hastens to add, I gave you the stone to protect you, Severus. I am not judging you for your wish. The same softly amused look, like Severus is aware of a joke that Percy should know too. Not for me, but for the boy. Oh. Percy becomes abruptly aware of the punchline and turns away, watching as one of the Parkinson House elves casts an elf charm to water the nearby flowers. It is possible to tie the boy's life force to the stone. When Percy looks back to Severus, he sees that the other man's face is strangely still and quiet, partially obscured by the smoke twisting out of the small white tube held in a surprisingly delicate grip. It should keep him tethered to the stone, tethered to the earth. What Nicholas Flamel did was nothing short of a Horcrux, Severus. Percy eyes Severus sideways and then shakes his head. You can't be serious. It will help the boy live. Forever, perhaps, laughs Percy incredulously. Severus, what are you suggesting? You've been telling me the entire year that the boy must die. Severus speaks over him, his voice steady, and even as if reciting nothing more exciting than a potion recipe for Percy to follow. It is a simple procedure. I will explain it to you thus. You first take the stone. No, Severus. Percy breaks in, the steel of command in his tone surprising them both. He blinks, resists the urge to apologize, and then continues more quietly. Severus, I understand the vow that you made to Lily. I understand that to let Harry die stands contrary to the ideals of your life. But you didn't see Flamel, Severus. He was barely living a human life. He didn't care about war or dark magic or our society or anything other than his scones and tea. Severus begins to interrupt, and Percy says loudly, "Harry would not want that, Severus." Severus falls silent. Percy notices that he has begun to squeeze the cigarette very tightly. A hint of petulance. "You hardly know the boy." "I know him better than I think," admits Percy. He thinks of the bruise of pain lingering under Harry's eyes, the sharp flash of resolve. "He's more like us than like them, you know. Dumbledore, Tom, the Dark Lord, even Grindelwald and Flamel. They don't understand duty or hopelessness or what it feels like to be powerless but have no option save to proceed." Percy pauses, but to his surprise Severus is quiet, though his famous hooked nose is twisted in a characteristic display of disgust. "Harry would not want to live forever." Percy shakes his head and huffs out a small laugh. "Nor would he want to pay the sort of price that it would require, even with the stone. Harry's duty is to die. It's his duty to himself, to the wizarding world, to his mother, to the prophecy. Our duty is to make his death count. We cannot save him, not if by his death the Dark Lord will be rendered vulnerable." "Lily," Severus begins, and then falls silent. Percy thinks of his own mother, of her unfriendly looks and raised wand, of his stocking hung carefully along with the rest. Paints she bought for him with hard-earned money and letters she wrote to him, full of every emotion that they shared, anger and love and resentment, and everything in between. English breakfast nearly spilling over the lip of a mug, the cake she'd baked him to celebrate his animagus transformation, Bellatrix dying by their wands. Percy has never seen his mother's boggart, nor his in this life, but he imagines that they are similar, the bodies of those they love, the deaths of those they've failed. "Lily would be proud of Harry," Percy says gently, "and of you too." For one prolonged second, the philosopher's stone gleams in the space of possibility between them, enigmatic and full of potential. For one prolonged second, Percy meets Severus' eyes and sees in them something shocking, unguarded vulnerability and sadness and confusion. "We will do what must be done," Severus says, like a revelation, like an incantation, and Percy feels a shudder down his spine. "We will do what must be done," he repeats, but his words are a promise or a vow, the last one he is likely to make. Percy is nearly shaking with fatigue by the time that he manages to reach Grimmauld Place, but he downs one of his reserve energy potions and forces himself to concentrate long enough for the apparition. Severus had left him to supervise Grindelwald's inevitable torture, but Percy had not felt as though he could survive the horrid sight, though the Dark Lord would definitely notice his absence. "He's gone," Andromeda says immediately, not even checking for his identity when he arrives at the agreed-upon meeting place and triggers her wards. She grabs his arm and apparats them both inside Grimmauld Place, their insides twisting unpleasantly as they pass through the protections. "Harry, he's gone. They're gone." Percy rubs tiredly at his temples, unable to take in this latest piece of news, his stomach threatening to revolt after the unpleasant apparition. "What do you mean, they're gone?" "He's gone," Andromeda clarifies, thin-lipped, angry. As he stares owlishly at her, she tilts her head toward the kitchen, a quick, abrasive gesture that is both impatient and anxious. "They race still here, though Nymphadora nearly had to stun them to keep them from running off when they learned he'd run." "Merlin." Percy has to sag against the wall, resting his arm where the house elf heads used to be. The wave of depression threatens to swell over his head. "You've lost him. He's gone. You'll die, and it will be for nothing." And Percy wishes irrationally for the sharp edge of Tom's magic, or the steady pull of Severus' gaze, something to incite a rush of adrenaline or anchor himself against. But he has only Andromeda, who steps forward cautiously and lays her hand on his shoulder, a movement so hesitant it occurs to him, suddenly, that perhaps she is as wary of providing him comfort as he is to her. It is quite frankly ridiculous, particularly since they have destroyed together two parts of the Dark Lord's soul, and he forces himself to relax the instinctive tensing of his muscles as she presses her hand more firmly against him. "They need you, Percy," she says quietly. "They are young and they are scared. They need you to reassure them." So Percy does, though his heart thuds sluggishly in his chest throughout the entire awful encounter. He tells them with false cheerfulness of Ginny's captivity in Pansy Parkinson's room, describing the frills and the colors and the rows of inane children's books, and Hermione manages to stir herself long enough to mutter a disparaging comment about her old classmate. He reassures them that they can find Harry, have always been able to find Harry, but that it is safer to remain here and allow him to make his way back in time, that he just needs time alone. Ron nods solemnly. He distracts them by retelling the story of each Horcrux's destruction, and Draco asks several pointed questions about Tom, all of which Percy deflects with ease. They are young, so young that in truth it breaks something inside Percy's heart that he had not known was still whole to break. He remembers them as adults at this age, battle-weary, war-torn, gaunt and fierce and determined and competent. Harry Potter at 19 had seemed impossibly adult to him, so confident, so knowing. He remembers watching the trio orbit each other alertly, so attuned to any threats in the room that they were at each other's sides in a heartbeat. They had seemed old enough to survive a war. These three teenagers do not. Perhaps by removing their battle, he did not allow them to grow that hard shell over their soft features. Perhaps a year of failures was harder to bear than a year of strife, and each failure had prepared them for the next, helped them grow. "Be glad they are young," says Andromeda an hour later, after he has, in a flash of insight, set them to researching the Elder Wand and Ravenclaw's diadem with the considerable aid of the Black Family Library. "Harry may need any information we have," he says gravely, and they all nod, even Ron, and do not protest as Harry would have that they'd tried the library already and emerged empty-handed. "You are not a parent, but you are an elder sibling as I am, so I imagine what I say is not unfamiliar to you. It is different to be the older sibling, particularly in a difficult house. You wish for your siblings to grow up and harden so that they may be allies. This is your weakness. But you wish to protect them from harm, which is your strength." Percy smiles bitterly. For some reason, the memory that strikes him most clearly is that of Bill during Percy's first year, crunching those nasty kippers, shining and young and so honorable and brave. In this timeline, Bill has hidden out the war with his French fiancée and his great-aunt, and he will hopefully emerge from the war unscarred and unscathed. Percy had wanted to protect him, and so he had, but who had protected Percy? Tonks, an only child, takes an uncomfortable sip of tea. Perhaps she is wondering why her mother did not give her siblings, provide her the opportunity to balance that weakness against that strength. But she says only, "What now?" Percy sighs heavily, the kind of sigh that threatens to steal the rest of his breath and leave him cold and inert on the floor. "We must trust that he comes when the Dark Lord calls. It will be soon, tomorrow," he said. "Why the delay?" Percy contemplates explaining that Lucius has returned and dangled the Elder Wand in front of Voldemort's face, but says only, "The Dark Lord is preparing his magic." "What can we do?" Tonks leans forward, forearms on the wooden kitchen table, hair sparking with a furious yellow. Behind her, Creature quietly mops the floor, looking far cleaner and cheerier than Percy has ever seen him. He contemplates asking for a cup of tea as well, but his stomach twists in protest. He wants to do something nervous, to trace his hand around a delicate china cup or adjust his glasses on the bridge of his nose. But he knows by now how to suppress these urges. He meets Tonk's gaze solidly and says, "You must stay here." "What? You are a known member of the Order." Percy turns to Andromeda and says, apologetically, "In truth, you ought to stay here as well. I will leave that decision up to you, though of course you would not be formally invited." Andromeda inclines her head. She understands that they may need her presence to contain Tom. "I can hide myself quite thoroughly." "I am the Aura," protests Tonks indignantly. "Top of my class. Percy, you will need me." "Yes," agrees Percy, who had anticipated Tonks' refusal. "We will need you, but we will not need you at this confrontation." This placates Tonks marginally. She settles back in her chair and crosses her arms. "What are you saying?" Percy opens his bag, battered, shielded, as much of a part of his body as his wand holster, and withdraws the scroll of parchment he prepared a few days ago, back when he'd had the luxury of time. "This is every known Death Eater or Snatcher, and their suspected or confirmed place of residence, as well as all of my notes on the Dark Creature clans," Percy says. He does not hand it over, needing Tonks to understand the gravity of what he is saying. "Includes all of the crimes for which each is responsible, or at least those that I know about. If the Dark Lord dies, his followers will be crippled but likely not killed. Do not apprehend them before. I will leave it to you and your mother to work out a signal. We cannot tip off the Dark Lord to what we are planning. The moment you can, move quickly. Get as many of them into captivity as you can, and keep them guarded carefully. And if the Dark Lord does not die? Andromeda asks shrewdly. Percy does not flinch. Then you do not act, and we discuss how to best use this information to our advantage at a later time. A conflicted expression crosses Tonk's face as she surveys the scroll in Percy's hand. Percy waits her out. He knows that she will take it because Tonks, unlike many of the people he works with, is not an idiot despite her willful nature and bias to action. If the Dark Lord does die, then someone like Tonks is precisely who should be crippling the Death Eaters, Tom or no Tom. And if he does not pass smoothly from this world, well, Percy may be next to die, and he will be relieved to know he'd made his final report to Tonks. Fine, says Tonks finally, snatching the scroll so quickly that the edge slices Percy's finger and draws blood. It is surprisingly painful, and he stares at the small orb of blood emerging improbably from his finger. Percy has been tortured any number of times, but this small pain is striking, not to mention distracting. Sorry, Tonks says contritely, healing his finger for him. But the echo of the pain still lingers over the invisible wound, distracting him long into the night, after he's bid goodbye to the black women and the anxious teenagers, and returned to the silence of his flat. The Dark Lord has not summoned him. Percy thinks with a shiver that perhaps he is still torturing Grindelwald. He does not pursue Harry. Andromeda had shown him Harry's note, written in his characteristically chicken-scratch handwriting. I need to be alone. Percy does not think that Harry was captured and coerced. For one, any Death Eater would have taken at least Draco for a prize, had they come across the teenagers, and he does not doubt, as Andromeda had, that Harry would arrive when bid by the Dark Lord. No, Percy feels certain that Harry has gone to Hogwarts, or somewhere equally special to him, somewhere where he can be alone and contemplate his impending death, come to terms with the circumstances of his destiny. Percy certainly would. He would now, if he hadn't spent the last 11 years coming to terms with his role in this life. This night is the last night of Percy's life, or so he tells himself, staring around his dark and shadowed flat, the too small kitchen table with the chairs he jammed in regardless, the golden goblets on the sideboard, the single window with Hermes' perch. That Tom had not contacted him today only confirms Percy's sad, slow realization that Tom has come to the conclusion that Percy had known he would. So Percy will die tomorrow, or the day after, or the day after that. His chances of survival are as slim as Harry's, and he does not have a mythical wand to protect him, only the waning favor of a sliver of the Dark Lord's soul. He tests himself against the thought. It may mean he's eaten his last meal, seen Tonks and Andromeda, and Ron for the last time, that he's taken his last walk through the ministry, that he's failed to reconcile fully with his parents, that he will never tell McGonagall the truth, that he will never free Myrtle. It may mean that the sum total of his life is now fixed, and he cannot bias his impact on the world any further. Strangely, Percy does not feel scared, nor particularly resentful. He feels only tired, a great sweeping exhaustion, like he is trapped at the bottom of the great lake and looking upwards through its murky depths, each movement of his arms and legs arduous, his chest a study in suppressed agony. The only thing left to do is say his goodbyes, and to his surprise he feels there is only one goodbye that he thinks he really must say. Percy sits at his desk and selects his finest quills from a selection of fine quills. For his ink, he chooses the small capped bottle that his parents had gifted him for his Hogwarts graduation. The cap has a delicate lion inlaid with glimmering gold leaf, and it roars silently at him as it lays next to the creamy parchment. Dear Severus, I hope that you have survived long enough to read this message. The Dark Lord will soon summon Harry to him, and I believe I will not survive the next few days. Please do not mourn for me. I have been sure of this for some time, I think, though I have not recognized the emotion for what it is. As you know, I am not particularly strong at naming my feelings, nor identifying the cause of them. I write this letter in an attempt to convey to you the depths of my gratitude and admiration for the role you have played in my life for the last 5 years, or 11, or 20, or something like that. You have been a teacher when I have needed it, an unexpected partner, and dare I say, even a friend. I hope I have been a useful ally to you in return. These have been an incredibly lonely series of years. The only thing I have been sure of is my own feelings of doubt and unease. To have you by my side, shouldering this mantle together, has made the burden almost bearable. Thank you for your presence in my life. Please forgive me for my failings with Tom. I have let you down, and I am ashamed of my weaknesses. Percy lifts his head from the page, surveying what he has written. In truth, he cannot imagine Severus will ever see what he'd written. If Severus survives the war somehow, Percy cannot imagine he would return to Percy's flat in his absence and look for a message where Percy intends to leave it, hidden in the frame of the now blank canvas where he'd once painted a life ward for his father into being. I do not know why Tom affected me the way that he did. Perhaps if I had another lifetime to live, I could figure it out. With only a few days left, I can only apologize and hope that you understand. He stops again, his fingers twitching with the desire to cross the whole letter out and give up. But this may be his last chance to speak to Severus. It all feels so insufficient, these words on this page. What is it that he really wants to say if he could speak with the freedom of the dead? Promise me one thing, Severus, on the basis of all that we have shared. Your penance is complete. You have saved the world in a way, and you have brought Lily's son to adulthood the best you could. Do not mourn his part in this play any more than mine. We have both faced our deaths with clear eyes, as Regulus did, and Dumbledore, and Lily as well, and decided that we would face death in the hope of a better future. I know that such words from me may be unwelcome or unexpected, and I do not blame you for your anger when you read them. Yet if I could ask you one thing, it would be that you live, Severus, free of guilt. Do not waste the gifts you have been given, nor the skills you have painfully obtained. Please tell my family that I am sorry for the pain that I have caused them. I leave it to you to decide what truth to tell everyone. I trust you in this, as I trust you in all things. Please tell Professor McGonagall that I would have been lost in this life without her as a mentor and a guiding force for me. And tell my parents that I was sorry to disappoint them. And tell Myrtle that I do not think I will return as a ghost. But as always, I appreciate the offer. Thank you for everything. Percy Weasley laying in bed, Percy contemplates what to do with these final minutes. Should he walk once more through his soul, contemplate his mistakes, confront the confused tangle of feelings he has about Tom? It's strange. By almost every metric, Percy has failed in this task nearly as egregiously as he'd failed his other life. Over a decade, he'd lived in this new old body. A decade lived with 2 decades of foresight, and he'd made nearly all the same mistakes again, and even introduced several new ones. In this life, he has a mark on his arm and a half-torn soul, 2 deaths to his name, and several others on his conscience, an intimate relationship with a Horcrux, and the surprising, dubious honor of being chosen to be sworn to the Dark Lord's side for the rest of his life. At the same time, he searches in his memory for that sharp tang of bitter regret, the overwhelming guilt and malaise that had characterized the last days of his last life, and he finds he cannot recognize those feelings any longer. In his previous life, he had regretted what he had not done, a shapeless, formless target that he could not pin down and dismiss. In this life, he knew exactly what to regret, writing in the damned diary instead of destroying it outright, keeping his secret from Severus for so many unnecessary years, not utilizing the order more purposefully, and so he finds it harder to summon the same sadness. The Dark Lord had said it best. Percy had been made better by the war, made more purposeful and intelligent and powerful. He dealt with magic far more complex than anything he'd even known about before. He commanded men and saved lives and brought Tom back to life by the force of his own will. He'd spoken to Nicholas Flamel and held the Elder Wand in his own hands. Everything had felt so inevitable to him, as if he'd been unable to make any decisions other than the ones that he did. He supposes that means that he cannot judge himself for his inactivity. The only scales he must weigh himself on are those that measure one's impact on the world. So no, he decides, reaching for one of the last decanters of dreamless sleep. Let his soul be judged by the Dementor who comes to claim it. He does not wish to spend his last minutes in life thinking through what could have been, nor regretting the choices he'd made. At least in this world, he'd had the ability to make those choices. Percy will sleep, and in the morning he will see the Dark Lord defeated, and he will do his best to contain Tom, and then he will die, and it will all be over, and he will disappear to whatever death really is, whether it is a long and cold sleep, or nothingness, or everything, and it will be over, and he can rest. When he wakes in the morning, it is to the improbable scent of coffee, and perhaps warm bread. For several drowsy seconds, Percy thinks he may be in the burrow, and the footsteps outside are Charlie's or George's, both of whom are earlier risers than the rest of them. His parents do not drink too much coffee, preferring tea, but at times his mother goes through the whole process of brewing coffee by hand, something she had learned from a Muggle-born classmate. She'd wake before the rest of them and play music softly from the wireless as she ground the beans with a spell before measuring them into a glass canister and pouring boiling water carefully on top, so that the whole concoction frothed up fiercely and filled the room with the scent. Percy had enjoyed the solemn, important task of pressing the plunger down, feeling the resistance of the water mixed with the ground coffee, standing on his tiptoes to beat the coffee into pulpy submission, leaning his whole weight on the contraption until his mother, laughingly, would congratulate him on his strength. In both lifetimes, Percy had purchased a French press from the Antiques and Oddities store in Diagon Alley, though in both lifetimes it was used only a number of times before the war built to such an extent that Percy felt unsafe having a Muggle device, even in the privacy of his own house. When the last vestiges of sleep drip away from the corners of his eyes and into the starched white pillows, Percy realizes with a lurch that he is in the same miserable little flat he has always been in, and someone is outside making coffee. His mother, Severus. What would be odder? Percy swings himself out of bed and slides his feet into his slippers, padding noiselessly to the door and peering out. He has his wand ready and a shield rippling invisibly around his body, though he can't imagine any intruder would let him sleep in and prepare him coffee the Muggle way before murdering him in cold blood. "I can see you," says Tom, and Percy starts in surprise before guiltily edging into the main area. Tom. Tom is in his flat, making him coffee. Percy takes a seat at the small kitchen table, watching with a sort of detached fascination as Tom directs his magic to press on the plunger. Perhaps he is still dreaming, though of course he had taken dreamless sleep. "Tom," Percy finally says, as Tom floats a cup of the coffee toward him. What are you doing?" "It'll be a big day today," Tom says, floating a plate with a slice of toast toward Percy next. Percy takes it, feeling absolutely befuddled. Had Tom gone to a shop and purchased a loaf of bread? Where was the rest of it? Percy has seen Tom resurrect a frog and a mouse, but cannot begin to imagine him buying bread at a shop. The matron at the orphanage had one of these. I was never allowed to use it, but I used to watch her anyway. Percy takes a sip of coffee and artfully manages to hide a gag. It is far too strong and viscous, and Tom had not added any cream or sugar, but he swallows obediently. "Thank you." Percy has the sudden desire to ask Tom whether he's been sneaking around Hogwarts without telling him, but he takes another firm sip of the coffee to forestall any inappropriate questions. "So it'll be today?" he asks instead, as if the Dark Lord hadn't told him the very same. "You're sure of it?" Tom nods confidently. "Hogwarts," he says, which does not surprise Percy at all. He's asked Yaxley and Rookwood as well, and bids Severus to fetch the Gryffindor head of house. "So he wants witnesses," Percy says slowly, trying not to let the relief show on his face at the sound that Severus is still alive. Tom nods, watching Percy with bright, eager eyes. Percy catches the cue and takes another obedient sip of coffee, washing it down with a crunch of toast. "And you're to bring your sister so that you may be assured of her safety." "Must she be there?" Percy protests. "The boy will come anyway." "You may ask him if you like," Tom says with a heavy dose of irony. "But he told me you must bring the girl." The Dark Lord likely wants Ginny there to ensure Percy's own compliance, as well as Harry's. Percy scowls despite himself and tries to hide behind another bite of toast. "And you, what is your plan?" "You'll see," says Tom self-importantly. The expression on his face has a touch of dreaminess, like part of Tom is already at Hogwarts, watching Harry Potter fall, wielding his magic against his own soul. Percy wonders nonsensically if Tom is nervous. "You'd best be ready. We'll have a lot to do." "Tom." Percy says suddenly, as Tom visibly prepares himself to leave. This may be his last chance to ask, risk be damned. Have you been surveying Hogwarts? Tom stiffens imperceptibly, his fingers curling into themselves and the edges of his nostrils flaring like the openings of a cave. But his voice is as steady as usual when he looks up at Percy, a hint of a smirk, and says, "Whatever do you mean?" "My sister saw you," Percy says, irritated at once with Tom's knowing prevarication, too irritated to immediately process the threat to Ginny that he had just introduced with his words. "Have you been going to Hogwarts and not telling me? I was not aware I owed you an account of my whereabouts. Certainly, I do not expect you to provide me with the same." Percy winces, acknowledging the point. His and Tom's relationship has always been centered around his flat, or the minister's office, private places where they happen to overlap at predictable yet unreliable periods in the day. Tom has never asked Percy what he does with his own private time, and Percy had never asked Tom, the knowledge thrumming unsaid between them that perhaps each party did not want to know. "It's just, I would have enjoyed going with you," Percy says in an attempt to diffuse Tom's suspicions. "That's all. I didn't mean to question you, Tom." Tom's fingers straighten and flex, and he leans his forearms on the kitchen counter, his body a study in straight, angular lines, yet reminding Percy undeniably of a coiled snake under a rock. "I've been doing more than surveying it." His voice is brighter now, and Percy can feel the exultant swing of his magic rippling through the air. He looks sideways at Percy with a glimmer of mischief and asks, "What is the point of Hogwarts, Percy?" "What?" Percy sets down the toast that he had still been absently holding. "What do you mean, to educate our youth?" Tom waves this aside. "You can't hardly believe that our four founders were so invested in our youth to pour their considerable time and resources into a school," he scoffs. "Come, Percy, think, what is the point of Hogwarts?" Percy frowns, seeing that Tom means to pose him a puzzle. What he thinks of suddenly is Tobias, that smoked quail sitting pristinely on gold-rimmed plates. "To influence our youth," he says slowly, "to teach them what you mean to teach them." This answer surprises Tom. He can tell by the quick, evaluative glance that Tom levies at him from under his eyelashes. "That as well, I suppose. You must think bigger, Percy. Grander. Why did you use a portrait to save your father's life?" Percy bristles automatically at this reminder of his mistake, but he begs his voice to remain calm as he responds, "To augment my father's power." "Have you ever heard of an anchor, Percy?" Percy has the sudden, intrusive thought that McGonagall would be so incredibly disappointed in him if she knew what all of her careful, intentional lessons had produced in her star student. "I've heard the term before. A magical anchor," Tom lectures, "is something on which to tie your power. It steadies you, makes you strong, and augments your power as a life ward does, or even a Horcrux." Percy has always thought of an anchor more of a source of knowledge than of power, but he does not contradict Tom, continuing to feign ignorance. "The founders built an anchor worthy of their magic," continues Tom, his expression sliding back into dreaminess. "Every part of Hogwarts is magical. Every part of Hogwarts is strong, tied to the elemental magic of the ground. Every generation of students releases magic into the air, magic that Hogwarts uses to power itself." Percy cannot help but point out, "But the founders died." "But I have not." Tom stretches, a quick, satisfied shiver through his body, and turns so that he is resting against the counter with his back and looking directly at Percy instead. "I will use Hogwarts to anchor my magic," he whispers. "I will tap into my heritage, my birthright, and I will not make their mistakes." Percy thinks of it, of the magic that dances through the currents that blow through Hogwarts' drafty corridors, the magic that sparks through the portraits and the suits of armor, the magic that creakily moves staircases and lights enchanted candles. He thinks of the magic performed in classrooms every day, levitation charms and transfigured goblets, and everything in between, and then he thinks of that magic pulled inexorably into Tom's orbit. "You can't be serious." "Of course, we'll need only the best students," Tom admits, as if that had been Percy's objection to the plan. "I've been doing some surveying this year. It is the first year that there haven't been any mudbloods to clutter up the magic. There isn't as much of a difference in the quality or quantity of magic as I'd expected, but the students haven't been particularly motivated. I'd imagine we'll have to take it a step further. If we take only the strong students and we encourage them to practice their magic to their limits, it'll be cleaner, better magic. Percy shakes his head incredulously. He cannot say why, cannot put it into words, but the thought of Tom corrupting the magic of Hogwarts thus, of choosing students based only on whether their magic will enhance his, of taking the one thing that has stood inviolate in their history through all of time and stealing its power, it sickens him, and it disgusts him, and with a sharp pain in his stomach, it makes him look at Tom differently. Tom may not have understood the emotions churning inside Percy, but he seems to stiffen in response to some invisible indication of Percy's disgust. He launches himself off of the kitchen counter with a harsh movement of his arms and stalks toward Percy, who is still sitting, boxed in, at his tiny kitchen table. Come, Percy, do not tell me that you disagree with my plan. Everyone deserves the right to be educated, says Percy despite himself. Even Mariana, who had abandoned all of her elective courses before the Newts, or Oliver, who routinely skipped herbology for extra Quidditch practice. He hurries to add, "And Tom, this could be dangerous for you." "There is no magic that I do not know," Tom says pityingly. "I am Slytherin's heir. His magic cannot hurt me. What if the magic consumes you? Nothing can consume me." Tom shakes his head and leans over the kitchen table, palms flat on the wooden surface, hovering far too close to Percy for Percy's comfort. "You are unhappy with me. Do not tell me that this is what will make you betray me." "Tom," Percy protests automatically, his heart stuttering anxiously as he looks up to Tom's suddenly impassive face. "Why would you even say such a thing?" "A sworn companion," Tom says lightly, but the dangerous sort of lightly, where his magic nips at Percy's heels in warning. "Did he promise to make you immortal? You told me you were not interested in immortality." Percy can hear all of the unsaid questions as clearly as if Tom had delivered them in that same, even tone. To think that after everything, Tom is jealous, as if Tom isn't going to kill Percy himself, one day, as if Tom was not proposing that he tear down everything that their society holds dear for his own selfish whims. "I'm not interested in immortality, Tom, nor am I particularly interested in swearing eternal fealty to him." He hesitates, sensing this answer insufficient. A sudden burst of inspiration. "Tom, I had to make that promise, and the only way I'll be free of it is if you kill him and take his place. You'll do that for me, won't you?" Tom considers this silently. Then he clears his throat and says quietly, "You can be my sworn companion too, if you'd like." Percy leans forward. They are in dangerous, brittle territory, and he does not know how to proceed. "I do not need a vow to be by your side, Tom." "You may grow bored of me," Tom says in the same curious tone. "You may miss your family, or wish you were at Hogwarts or go back to your apprenticeship." Percy opens his mouth without any idea of what will fall out of it. "Why do you always doubt me?" "I do not doubt you." "You do," Percy insists. Perhaps this had been a foolish thing to say, but Percy is feeling reckless and foolish and gloriously alive, perhaps for the last time. He thinks of Hogwarts, as empty and forlorn as the portrait of his father, and then of the 16-year-old boy that he'd once known, and he feels a great wave of sadness lap at the shore. "You wish for me to prove myself forever to you, Tom. Why do you not want to prove yourself to me?" Tom snaps back, instantly prepared for an argument. "You've not had any issues swearing fealty to the Dark Lord." "Because he'll kill me if I don't," Percy points out, acerbically. "Would hope that my actions over the last 6 years would count in my favor. Tom, everything I've done since I was 16 has been for you." Percy cannot name the expression on Tom's face, the slightly bared teeth, the narrowed, almost anxious eyes, the flush staining his cheeks. "You've threatened me before," Tom says triumphantly. "You've made me swear vows. You tried to kill my father to control me," Percy exclaims incredulously. "Merlin, Tom, are my words not enough? Have my actions not convinced you? We have mistrusted each other enough. Tom, are you not tired of it? Have I not shown you my esteem for you? What can I do to prove to you that I—" Here he breaks off, chest heaving, and his heart thudding combatively throughout his veins. Tom's eyes are bright and challenging, and he's very close to Percy, with only a half-drunk cup of coffee and a half-eaten slice of toast between them. And Percy thinks nonsensically of the muggle Persephone, who'd eaten 6 seeds of a pomegranate offered to her by the great wizard Hades, and in reward had been cursed to live between worlds, the first known half-blood, able to exult in her magic for 6 months before returning to the flat, colorless world above. Tom's voice is very quiet, and Percy cannot suppress a shiver. That you what, Percy? Percy does not know what to say. He does not know what he wants to say, what he could say, what he had been trying to say. All of the ways he could have ended that sentence hover between them like wasps, some disguised as harmless bees, and others with deadly stingers. And then, as if sensing Tom and Percy's shared tension, Percy's mark begins to burn, a reminder of what must first be completed, before any sentences can be finished, and any admissions can be loosed into the world. "I'll see you there," says Tom, a small, private smile curling the corner of his lips. "I have something to do first, and I do not think the Dark Lord would appreciate it if we arrived together." Percy nods, feeling mute and exhausted from their strange argument, and Tom leaves him with the memory of a scorching, searing look. The Dark Lord, when Percy sees him, is jittery in his own way, snapping at Cyprus when the man tries to suggest, in a thin voice, that he accompany Voldemort on his mission, and clenching his fist at intermittent intervals by his side, as if angry that his hand is expecting to brush against a sinuous body covered in scales. When Percy arrives, the Dark Lord turns his ire on him, which washes over him like thick, sticky tar. "Where have you been?" Voldemort snarls, and for an irrational second Percy thinks of his mother. "My apologies, my lord," Percy says, bowing his head. He has actually come prepared with something so as to explain his delay. "I was preparing instructions for some of the ministry departments for a gala to be held in your honor tomorrow evening. I thought you may like to formally announce your victory over Harry Potter and reassure the public that the threat of the violent criminals that call themselves the Champions of Order has been neutralized." "A gala," repeats Voldemort, some of his ire broken by the novelty of this idea. Cyprus opens his mouth, perhaps to suggest that they host it at his manor, and Percy cuts his eyes sharply at the door. Taking the hint, the other man bows himself away before the Dark Lord can punish him further. "What do you mean?" "Well, my lord, until now we have existed in a state of martial law," Percy explains. "People are growing weary of the fear. Our enemies have been defeated. Andromeda tells me that Sirius Black was killed late last night, and Remus Lupin barely escaped with his life. They tried to free some of the Mudbloods from Azkaban and were set upon by the Dementors loyal to you. Nymphadora Tonks has forsaken loyalty to the group, and my siblings have similarly grown disillusioned with Dumbledore after the revelations of Rita Skeeter's latest book. The last remnant of the Order may be Alastor Moody, and he has not been seen for months." "What are you saying?" Voldemort snaps impatiently, but not angrily, which is the key indication to Percy that he has distracted the wizard successfully. "I thought you may like to introduce yourself as a benevolent ruler, my lord," Percy says carefully. "Beloved, adored, the very best of our society. And you believe people will not revolt when they hear Harry Potter is dead." "Some will," Percy says honestly. "Like how some traveled the streets wailing after Dumbledore's death. But the vast majority of people will be so relieved that the austere methods of the war are over that they will follow you anywhere." "Clever," says Voldemort grudgingly, and the praise is as unexpected as anything positive Severus has ever said. Then he pauses and gives Percy a curious sideways look. "Dumbledore and Grindelwald were contemporaries. I do not know how that reporter determined the truth, but Grindelwald confirmed it for me yesterday." Percy risks. Did he confirm, my lord, whether the wand had truly passed to Dumbledore? Voldemort sends him an evaluative glance and responds. He seemed to believe it likely, but I disposed of him, nevertheless. Percy has experienced enough death by now to only nod at this news, unable to spare any sorrow for an ancient Dark Lord killed by his successor. "My lord, I have requested that Andromeda Black seek out Draco. If he is being held by whatever faction of the Order still remains, she will find him." Voldemort nods thoughtfully to himself. "I wish to meet the last Black Sister. She wishes to meet you as well, my lord." Percy dares to add, "If Percy dies in the next few days but the Dark Lord survives, Andromeda would be a good candidate to carry on their mission. I believe many of Dumbledore's old followers would like to meet you, my lord. Many of them object primarily to war, not to your leadership, nor your ideals. I believe they view the loss of life and the perceived loss of their liberties to be inconvenient to their own personal goals. Purebloods are all the same, the Dark Lord says, dismissively, and with a hint of Tom's humor. You'll soon see that, Percival. They are so used to being indulgent and wealthy that they center all of their actions around their comforts. Percy cannot help but think of the men gathered around Avery's dinner table, their faces hard, and the undercurrent of anger beneath their carefully civilized words. A keen observation, my lord. You may choose a selection of these purebloods to present to me at the gala, Voldemort says with finality. Now, come. You have done well these last few days. I trust you are still in accord with what we last spoke. Percy sweeps a low bow, one that Lucius would recognize is typically used to bestow great respect. My lord, it would be the greatest honor of my life. Voldemort smiles thinly and holds out his hand. To Hogwarts, then, and to the rest of our lives, Percival. And Percy is personally apparated through the wards by the Dark Lord. An hour later, they find themselves at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, arranged in a strange square, the castle looming at the top of a large hill, hundreds of students locked inside for their own safety. Percy had insisted. Voldemort stands with his back to the forest, facing the castle, his red eyes glowing with anticipation. Severus arrives with McGonagall, as ordered, as a representative from the school to bear witness to the day's historic acts. Yaxley and Rookwood stand to the Dark Lord's right, both silent and watchful. Tom stands next to Percy on the Dark Lord's left, and Percy stands with Ginny, his wand on her and his heart in his throat. They all wait, silently, unmoving. Percy glances at the trees, their large dark branches spread between the gleaming grass and the sky, and wonders if Andromeda is there, concealed. Minutes pass, and then an hour. McGonagall does not say a word, her gaze seeking Percy's desperately, and Percy can only pray that she too trusts him enough to stay quiet during these proceedings. Severus glances at him, and Percy catches his gaze and holds it, hoping to convey his great relief that Severus has survived. Rookwood and Yaxley shift. They are not particular friends, but as they are the last of the original inner circle, they likely understand much more of what is occurring than other Death Eaters would. They have noticed Tom and registered his familiar face, but they have not spoken. They have seen Tom transform into Voldemort, and they are prepared to see Voldemort transform back into Tom. Ginny stands very straight and very still, though her bonds must be hurting. She looks steadily at McGonagall, as though the sight of her old teacher is giving her enough strength to endure the events to follow, or perhaps to communicate to McGonagall that she too must go along with the charade, even if they do not understand what is happening. They stand there for so long that Percy's legs begin to ache, and he begins to wonder if perhaps Harry did not receive, or did not believe, the message that Voldemort had sent. But then, just as the sun begins to depart its position in the center of the sky, brilliantly streaming light over the castle as it makes its weary way to the horizon, Harry Potter appears and begins to walk across the lawn, Ron and Hermione behind him. Draco, thank Merlin, is nowhere to be seen, though Percy glares at the other two, who should have had the sense not to come too. The electric change that snaps through the group is nearly tangible. All of them straighten at once. All of them lock their attention onto Harry as he walks slowly across the lawn. Ron and Hermione match his pace. Both their eyes are red-rimmed and their eyes circled by dark patches, but their faces are stony and impassive as they trail across the grounds of Hogwarts, walking behind Harry for the last time, making up the only funeral procession Harry is likely to have. They must be confused about the gathering, about all of the players gathered silently for the final move, but they do not say anything, taking their places in the square as if they had planned it. As Harry draws nearer, Percy notices the ring on his finger at once, and he does not have to look at Voldemort or Tom to know that they recognize it too, though hopefully only as the Horcrux, not as the Resurrection Stone, which Percy now feels certain it contains. Ring, cloak, wand. Percy does not truly know if being the Master of Death means anything at all, but at least Harry has all three. The rest is up to him. Tell me, Harry, Voldemort says conversationally as Harry stops silently in front of him. Have you ever heard of the Elder Wand? Harry cannot prevent his grip from tightening on the wand, which is clearly Dumbledore's, now that they are all looking at it closely. It's mine. So it is. Voldemort says musingly. Or so Dumbledore would have you believe. I spoke to Grindelwald last night, young Harry, and he was very clear that he had lied to his dear friend Dumbledore about how precisely wand ownership is conferred. The wand has remained in Grindelwald's control, though Dumbledore would have you believe otherwise. Harry frowns, and Hermione behind him, though Ron continues to stare ahead with a face twisted in angry scorn. Dumbledore wanted me to have the wand. It was never Dumbledore's to give, much like that ring on your finger. Voldemort shakes his head almost pityingly. Dumbledore used to lie to me too, Harry. He always wanted something from me, and then mistrusted me when I was not willing to give it to him. He knew you were evil right from the start, Harry snarls. He showed me those memories. Did he now? Comments Voldemort, as if unfazed, though Percy can feel the spike of his magic responding to his irritation. Memories can be so deceptive, Harry. He asked me to be his apprentice, you know. Did he show you that? Tom stiffens next to Percy, who cannot help but gape at Voldemort. Harry is equally shocked, but strangely it is McGonagall who whispers, "Impossible." Oh, yes. Voldemort has a strange smile playing on the corners of his serpentine mouth. He wanted to keep an eye on me, wanted to keep me safely within Hogwarts. He was very clear that as his apprentice I would study only what he thought appropriate. He could hardly deny me the offer. I was the best student at Transfiguration that Hogwarts has ever seen. Had Dumbledore given Tom that creamy leather diary, bid him to fill it with a proposal worthy of their time, and that Tom had excelled at Transfiguration, at Percy's art, that he was Dumbledore's pick before McGonagall, Percy cannot help but share a horrified glance with his former professor. You see, Dumbledore decides who we are when we are very young, Voldemort continues lightly. Long did it take him to ally the Weasley family to you, Harry? Did you ever wonder how such a poor wizarding family could afford an extra mouth to feed? You met a version of me when you were just 11. Dumbledore had already decided you ought to be the hero. There was a prophecy, Harry starts defiantly. Perhaps, Voldemort says with a casual shrug, as if he hadn't been hounding Percy for that very same prophecy all year. Perhaps not. You never heard it from the orb itself, did you? You have only Dumbledore's word for what it contained. Harry is silent, staring at Voldemort with an expression of pained confusion. Dumbledore convinced your mother to enact very dark blood wards around you, Voldemort says softly. Wards that could be powered only by a great sacrifice. What a coincidence that the wizard who desired your mother heard this alleged prophecy and came back to tell me who it spoke of, to ask that she may be spared for his own gratification. I gave her the opportunity to spare herself, you know. Did he tell you that? I told her that she may give you up and live, and she chose to die, thus powering the trap that Dumbledore had set, with poor Severus as an unwilling pawn. Had I not attacked you, your parents never would have died, and you never would have had the protection of the wards. He set us both on this path, Harry. The agonized glare that Harry levies on Severus seems to land like a physical blow. Percy watches with sympathy as Severus flinches, an electric bolt that thrums through his body as this secret is so casually revealed to Lily's son. But all Harry says is, Dumbledore was a great man, friends with the dark wizard Grindelwald. The Dark Lord smiles thinly, seeming to delight in each word. Murdered his own sister, despised muggles, and thought they were unworthy. He hated me at 11 years old, Harry, just as he made you feel he loved you. I had done nothing wrong, save lash out with my magic at the cruel children who sought to make me feel ashamed of my powers. Percy registers at the same time as Voldemort how this seems to mean something to Harry, who stiffens. You experienced the same, didn't you? Voldemort shakes his head sorrowfully. You've hurt muggles too, I would wager. Your stupid relatives, those muggles unworthy of your care. But Dumbledore celebrated you for the same impulses he punished in me. Why are you saying all of this? Harry bursts out, his chest heaving, and the flecks of unshed tears shining in his vivid green eyes like a twisted echo of Dumbledore's twinkle. Just kill me already. I believe you have the right to know why you are going to your death, Voldemort says, and Percy feels suddenly that he is telling the truth. This is Voldemort scheduling his attack for after the owl exams, Tom keeping the Dursleys alive so that Harry may kill them himself, both of them giving Harry chances to fight back fairly, in the Chamber of Secrets, in the graveyard. It saddens Percy, somewhere deep inside him that he cannot name, that even as a Dark Lord, Tom would have spent his time researching Harry's childhood, noting painfully the similarities in their circumstances and the differences with which Dumbledore responded. Where does that leave Percy, hovering awkwardly in the middle, able to understand Tom's childhood of poverty and resentment and hatred of Dumbledore, but undeniably part of the same pureblood society that Voldemort so reviles? Much could have been averted if Dumbledore was honest with us both, Harry. There is a long silence, where Harry stares at Voldemort, and Voldemort looks steadily back. Once again, it is like the rest of the world does not exist, as if Voldemort is speaking only to Harry, as if the rest of them are only there as an audience, as accessories to a tale older than them all. Dumbledore was doing what he believed to be right. Nothing excuses what you've done, Tom. Voldemort sighs, as if disappointed. At least you will die with that conviction, if not with the truth, he says, almost to himself. But now you will die, dear Harry. The boy who lived will live no more. Let my friends go, Harry says, his voice evenly. Ron and Hermione shift angrily behind Harry, but Percy glares at them and they say nothing. He will force them all to do what needs to be done if he has to subdue them all himself. My life for theirs. Voldemort sweeps an exaggerated bow. Once you die, dear Harry, they are free to walk away. I swear this to you. He pauses just slightly and then adds, without looking at Percy, the war will end with your death. Those who accept my authority will have nothing to fear. You may tell Dumbledore's former allies, or those who disagreed with the premise of war, they are welcome to swear fealty to me. I do not hold grudges. I will not punish them. Percy relaxes infinitesimally. Voldemort keeps his promises, bound by whatever sense of honor guides him, though Percy cannot say in good conscience that Tom does not hold grudges. Harry looks at Voldemort for a long second, his green eyes meeting Voldemort's red eyes. He does not seem to notice Tom, though every muscle in Tom's body is clearly tensed, and Percy can feel the tension radiating off of him palpably. It is not in Tom's nature to be quiet for so long, and Percy monitors Tom nervously, like a healer hovering by the bedside of a patient on the verge of death. You can still end this, Tom, Harry says finally, and Tom and Voldemort flinch in unison, as if one crack of magic passes through them at the same time. If you regret it, truly regret it, your soul will be whole once more. Killing me will not fix you. I do not need to be fixed, hisses Voldemort, his face twisted in a monstrous grimace of rage. Tom tenses in anger, and Percy leans infinitesimally closer, as if the heat of his body will calm Tom. Just a few more minutes. Percy can hardly breathe. And I regret nothing, Harry Potter, save that I failed to kill you when I had the chance. I will not make that mistake again. Say your goodbyes, Harry. You have only seconds left. Harry lifts his head. His eyes are clear of tears, and his face looks almost relaxed. He turns and looks at each face in turn, passing over Yaxley and Rookwood without recognition, his eyes hardening at Severus and then softening at McGonagall. He looks steadily at Ron and Hermione, and then at Ginny he stops and says, I love you, Ginny. Ginny nods silently, her own eyes full of tears, though Percy is proud to note she does not allow them to fall. Harry inhales sharply and then looks at Percy without much expression. Percy keeps his face equally blank. He is not important in Harry's story. He is merely the executioner appointed to bring Harry to his death at the proper time. He will mourn Harry, but Harry ought not to waste any of his remaining seconds on Percy. Harry lingers on Tom for a few poignant moments, and Tom straightens under his enemy's gaze, the tension sliding from his frame and pooling at his feet. Then Harry completes his circle and faces Voldemort again. With all of the courage that Percy has always seen from their teenaged hero, sometimes watching with envy, sometimes with pride, and sometimes, as now, with a pained sort of resignation, Harry stands tall and unyielding, spreads his hands wide, and says in a firm, even voice, I am here of my own accord. Avada Kedavra, breathes Voldemort, almost lovingly, and without another sound, Harry Potter dies, crumpling to the ground. Several members of the audience cannot prevent themselves from gasping or sobbing at the sight. Even Percy inhales sharply. Another Horcrux defeated, or so he hopes. He shoves aside the thought that Harry has died too, forcing himself to focus on the Horcrux. Check on him, Percival, whispers Voldemort, his arms spread. Percy gulps, ignores Ron's angry gaze, and then walks 4 interminable steps over to Harry. He drops to his knees. Harry is incredibly still. Percy listens for a breath but hears nothing. and his stomach drops out of him. Part of him had been hoping that Harry would, despite all odds, survive his death, that the prophecy would protect him. Percy reaches for Harry's wrist and lays his finger against Harry's still, silent pulse. "He's dead, my lord." "Yaxley, confirm," orders Voldemort coolly, which could be either an insult to Percy or a measure of praise to Yaxley, or perhaps the Dark Lord cannot believe it any more than the rest of them. Yaxley takes the same 4 staggering steps forward and then kneels beside Percy. Yaxley scrabbles for Harry's pulse. As his fingers touch Percy's, they both feel it, a heartbeat that echoes through both of their bodies to their very bones. Sluggish at first, and then more persistent, pulsing through the 3 of them as if they share the same heart. Harry Potter is alive. Percy and Yaxley share a single gaze that seems to last forever. In Yaxley's eyes, Percy sees horror and confusion, but before it can turn to panic, Percy desperately slides his hand forward until it covers Yaxley's fingers, and he squeezes his hand over Yaxley's hand and Harry's wrist. In the squeeze, he sends all of their shared memories over the last few years, every afternoon in the Ministry complaining about Lucius, their shared complicity in Umbridge's death, their shared presence at that traitorous meal, their shared knowledge that they do not want this war to continue, not with the Dark Lord at the helm, not like this. "Dead," Yaxley says, and he squeezes Harry's wrist roughly himself, as if to steady himself. Percy feels Yaxley's dry fingers moving under his hand, and he feels the way that Harry catches his breath despite himself. Percy rises, feeling as if he is in a dream. Voldemort watches him carefully, as does Tom, and Percy summons every second of fear and sadness, and hope that he's felt over the last 11 years, and uses it to reinforce his occlumency shields until they nearly vibrate with his intensity. He will not betray Harry, not now, not at the very end. They go back to their opposite sides of the square. Percy meets Yaxley's wide-eyed gaze with his own and tries to bind him to silence over the 8 steps of grass between them. Harry Potter is alive. Harry Potter is alive. Harry Potter survived another killing curse. Oh Merlin, what are they going to do? Is the Horcrux gone? Had Percy damned them all with his sentimentality? Had he come back to the past only for everything to proceed exactly as planned? He hadn't felt anything when he touched Harry, but he'd handled other Horcruxes before without feeling that flash of pain that the locket had inflicted on him. Even as he feels Tom shift beside him, even as he looks at Severus' empty expression, even as Ginny and Hermione and Ron begin to tear up while Voldemort throws his head back in wild, exultant joy, Percy feels a sense of warmth build up inside him. Harry Potter is still alive, and Yaxley lied for Percy, Horcrux be damned. Tom stirs from beside Percy, his instincts perhaps tingling, or his impatience to defeat the Dark Lord winning over his caution, and Percy moves without thinking, taking a tiny step to his left so that his body brushes firmly against Tom. "Wait," he says silently in his head, his hand slithering out to catch Tom's, and his luck seems to hold because Tom listens to him and does not move. Tom's skin is cool beneath Percy's touch and strangely soft, and Percy finds his fingers tightening on Tom's despite himself. For 3 long heartbeats nothing happens. Voldemort laughs, and though nobody joins in, it seems not to matter. For 3 long heartbeats nothing in the world exists except for Voldemort's laugh. Then Harry pushes himself to his feet, and his wand is in his hand, and Voldemort's laugh freezes in his throat. "Good attempt, Tom," Harry says coolly, his eyes so dark they are nearly black. "Want to try again, or have you had enough?" Voldemort's magic rolls out, as does Tom's, and for a second Percy cannot breathe under the dual onslaught of shock and surprise and hatred. And then, Avada Kedavra, Voldemort bellows at the same time that Harry cries, "Expelliarmus!" And with a brilliant flash of green and red and golden light, Voldemort's curse rebounds on him, and the Dark Lord falls back dead. Before the shocked gasps can even leave everyone's throats, before Ginny's sobs can turn into laughter, before anything can happen, Tom takes 4 steps forward and knocks Harry to the ground with a savage blow. Ron's indignant yelp rings out into the silence. For a second later, Tom's magic comes soaring forward, erecting a shimmering circle of magic around he and Harry, blocking everyone out to stand uselessly outside in their surprise. "Stop!" Percy yells, as every wizard pulls out their wand. "Stop, all of you! Is he gone?" Yaxley gasps, his eyes searching for Percy. Rookwood is silent, but his hand is nearly white as bone around his dark, stubby wand. He's seconds away from attacking or disappearing, Percy can tell. He is, Percy says, but not Tom. He would say something else, but he feels his arm burning, and with a cry of pain he drops to his knees, unable to focus on anything other than his skin sizzling into a red-hot brand. He feels Tom's magic calling him, sweeping through the mark. Yaxley and Rookwood mirror him, and Severus too, the four of them brought to the knees as Tom's magic pulses furiously through their bodies. Ginny comes to his side, but he pushes her away roughly with a jerk of his hand. It is all he can do to focus on the familiar feel of Tom's magic, to measure himself against it, and pull himself slowly forward. 4 steps separate him from Tom's barrier, and those 4 steps take nearly everything out of him. Please, he whispers into the world, his vision darkening, Tom's rage so overpowering that he cannot smell the forest, nor hear everyone's cries, nor feel the grass beneath his knees, nor taste the blood filling his mouth from where he'd bitten his lip roughly. Let me in. Tom's magic washes around him as he inches closer to the barrier, shimmering in a strange, opaque sort of way, like a distorted mirror or the underside of the philosopher's stone. Vaguely, Percy is aware of hands grabbing at him, of the familiar feel of Severus magic, but with a burst of strength he pulls at the barrier with his magic until it recognizes him. With a surge of energy, he pushes himself forward, falling through the barrier. How is he alive? Tom demands, his voice nearly a howl. Percy blinks up at him in confusion. Outside the magical barrier, the figures move around in strange, alien patterns. He is struck by the oddity of it. He can feel their magic, hear their muffled voices, but they may as well be in another room. A second later, he gasps in pain. Tom has struck him across the mouth, sending him sprawling into the damp grass. Percy, how is he alive? I don't know, chokes Percy. His lip smarts. He raises a hand to it and looks at his fingers in bemusement. The red glaze of blood on his 2 longest fingers, an oddity his jumbled brain cannot immediately explain. Had Tom hit him like a common muggle? Percy screams a second later as the Cruciatus rolls over him like a dark, cold wave, hammering small pieces of ice into his skin and tearing strips of flesh off of his bones. Tom's Cruciatus is so incredibly cold. It is so jarringly intimate to feel Tom's magic tear into his skin savagely that Percy has the odd desire to laugh, even as his throat convulses in pain. What do you know? Tom roars, ending the curse, and for the first time, Percy sees the Dark Lord in Tom, rather than noticing Tom in the Dark Lord. It chills him and it steadies him, and he takes an extra heartbeat to gasp out his fear on the grass, trying to gather his breath before answering. He looks up slowly, and he sees Harry floating in front of him, his mouth open in a soundless scream, his body jolting and flailing against whatever spell Tom is using to torture him. Percy's mind feels sluggish and slow, and he struggles to focus as Tom whirls on him, his face a mask of rage. Maybe. The prophecy, Percy gasps out, feeling his body begin to howl with pain as sensation returns after the Cruciatus. He does not try to push himself to his feet yet. He is intimately aware of how to recover after the curse. Power, you know not. There is no power I do not know, Tom screams, and Harry's body jerks violently, convulsing wildly. A second later, Harry cries out, as Tom removes the silencing spell he must have cast, and Percy cowers into himself at the sound of Harry's screams. Tom turns on Harry in a fury. Tell me how you survived. Harry laughs, his voice raw, even as he hangs there by the strength of Tom's magic, in the center of the strange domed barrier of Tom's magic, Hogwarts a remote shadow in another world. You will never understand, he whispers, what it's like to have something worth dying for. Percy shivers, both at the calm understanding in Harry's eyes, this boy that has died twice for them, and the building storm of rage in Tom's. What magic do you know? I order you to tell me. Harry screams again, a piercing scream that fills the whole room, and Percy presses his body to the grass, fingers scrabbling for purchase in the dirt, weeping silently. Oh, Merlin, what is he going to do? Love, gasps out Harry when he can speak again, blood running freely from his scar. I know love. I wish you did too, Tom, but you'll never know love. You'll never understand what it is like to love another soul. Love, spits out Tom in disgust, turning away from Harry. Percy freezes despite himself as their gazes meet. Love. I have no need for love. Tom falls silent, staring at the ground as his gaze turns inward, his arms crossed tightly to contain the anger that still clearly threatens to spill from him. Percy stays extremely still. He isn't stupid enough to think that Tom has forgotten about him, but he doesn't want to attract Tom's attention until he has to. His mind is aching, his shields nearly torn to pieces by the pain of breaching Tom's shields and then surviving his torture, but Percy forces his thoughts to begin limping painfully along the lines of logic. So Harry has survived. It may be like the diadem attacking the diary, like Percy had once suspected. Perhaps no version of Tom can kill Harry, or perhaps Harry is the master of death and is truly immortal. Or maybe love, whatever that means, saved Harry again like Lily's love once kept him alive. Maybe the Horcrux is still there, or it's finally been removed. But Voldemort died. That, at least, constitutes the day of victory, or will constitute a victory if they can survive the next few hours. If Percy can contain Tom, maybe even defeat Tom, who looks in his rage ready to burn the entire castle to the ground. I have no need for love. Tom's form is so familiar to him. Percy's attention is caught by it, even as Tom turns again on Harry, demanding that Harry reveal the secret of his survival. He knows Tom's body, intimately, in a way, though of course they have so rarely touched, and Percy would still blush today to think of them even holding hands. Without the taint of the Dark Lord's magic nearby, Percy can feel Tom's magic, clean and cold, and so achingly familiar that his own magic is already anchoring himself against it in tired relief. But Tom's face is twisted into a cruel snarl of rage. But Tom had struck him down with his own hand and tortured him, and is torturing Harry now. But Tom will soon think to call on Hogwarts magic, if he hasn't already attempted that, to aid him in his fruitless effort to shield himself from future harm. Percy thinks of Tom, 11 years old, so desperate for Dumbledore's approval. Oh, Tom. He does not even begin to realize how damaged he still is, how vulnerable he still can be, how hurt he remains despite it all. Can you kill him when it really comes down to it? You might falter, Percy imagines Myrtle asking him, hovering in front of him. He imagines Severus, scowling down at him, his mother shaking his arm. Stop dithering and do it. McGonagall, raising an expectant eyebrow as he struggles yet again to transform into a lynx. Take a leap of faith. The Dementor, ageless in a way that Percy cannot begin to fully understand. You cannot win a battle of magic, but of souls. Tom, brushing lips tenderly over Percy, his magic purring over Percy's body. You have sheltered my soul in yours, and yet I have no need for love. Tom hums to himself and Percy tenses, recognizing the sound. Tom has thought of something. Indeed, when Percy looks up, Tom is staring at him with an evaluative glint of his eyes. Come, Tom orders, and for one wild second Percy considers whipping out his wand and murdering Tom, but he can't bring himself to do it. So he steps forward obediently and controls his flinch when Tom grabs his left arm. The mark on his arm is raised and raw, more red than black ink, and when Tom presses a finger to it, Percy's entire body explodes in flames. I have you, says Tom, and all of them, they are all linked to me. I have your souls. I have no need of love when I have power. The Cruciatus has introduced Percy to many forms of mental torture, torture that feels like nails, like hammers, like knives, torture that feels like flayed skin and bleeding wounds, torture that feels like each of his fingers is individually breaking. But what Percy feels now is something less tangible and yet infinitely more painful. He sees a golden glow at the corners of his eyes and feels faintly like he may be fainting, but then he sees his arm glow translucent and his stomach convulses in horror. Tom, Percy cries out, his voice nothing more than a rasp, but Tom ignores him, intent on stripping Percy's magic from him and the magic of all of the Death Eaters around the world. Though Percy does not know it, dozens of men drop to their knees, glowing golden, and their friends and enemies alike stare at them in shock as their bodies turn translucent, golden strands of magic weaving through their bodies. Tom, you promised me, Percy manages to say through the pain, each word a torment. Oh, shut up, says Tom dismissively, his face screwed into an expression of concentration. I thought. You cared for me, Percy pants out, anything to try and distract Tom, anything to stop his magic from gathering in his body and pouring out of him in a perfidious stream. He feels himself weakening, feels his magic growing tired, the golden streams inside him slowing to desultory drips, feels his grasp on the world loosening. He's so tired, and he wants to sleep. Tom laughs sharply, and the sound is more cutting than a knife. "Oh, Percy," he says, squeezing Percy's arm harder so Percy nearly faints at the pain. "I have cared for you, but if you care for me, you will understand why I must do this. You have turned down immortality at my side twice. You are always going to die, and so you may rest knowing your death has brought up on the future that we planned for." He was always going to die. Hadn't he told Tom that very same thing? Hadn't he said his goodbyes, knowing that they would be final? "I thought you needed me." As the pain continues to wash over Percy, as his magic howls as it tears through his body, Percy feels dizzyingly that he can see the magic as it ebbs out of him, in a clear golden stream. He can see the magic around him too, Tom's magic like the roar of a frozen river, Harry's magic, the magic in the air, waiting to be transformed into being. He sees this magic, and realizes suddenly that he is within it and separate from it, that as he feels this part of him rip away from him, he becomes aware that there is another part of him that can formulate his thoughts as they race through his mind, and a third part of him that contains his beating heart and the great trees of Hogwarts and everything he's ever known and loved. Slowly, deliberately, Percy measures himself against the pain. Slowly, deliberately, he detaches himself from his magic and reaches into his pocket, where his fingers close around a small grey stone. "Die with grace," says Scrimgeour, says Severus, says Percy to himself before he sleeps. "He will die, but he's not dead yet." "Part of me loved you," says Percy honestly. His mind feels slow. After everything, after 11 years of studying soul magic in a body that was not quite his, he still does not know enough about magic, still does not know how to stop Tom from harvesting the magic of the Death Eaters, still does not know whether Tom even can build himself a new soul or draw upon the great magics of Hogwarts. But he knows Tom, and at the end of it all, he knows himself too. Tom hesitates, just for a second, his fingers stilling on Percy's forearm, the gesture suddenly intimate, as if a cruel, twisted imitation of a lover's caress. Percy knows before Tom asks that he will ask the next question, will not be able to let a comment like that go unaddressed. "What do you mean?" "We could have been partners," continues Percy slowly, his voice barely audible. "You're the greatest wizard of your time. Tom, sometimes I can hardly imagine what you could have accomplished." "What I will accomplish," Tom insists, the edge in his voice betraying how Percy's words are bothering him. Percy shakes his head slowly. "If you had just been a man," he says honestly. "Oh, Merlin, Tom, do you realize the type of man you could have been? Dumbledore, Grindelwald, even Flamel, they barely hold a candle to the man you could have been." Tom digs his nails into Percy's skin, but Percy controls the flinch and keeps talking. He's found a way to anchor himself against the pain of his magic ebbing slowly away. The pain still roars in his mind, but he allows it to pass through, acknowledged but not opposed. "I am more than you," he tells his magic softly and wrenches his mind away from the agony. "But being a man was never enough," he says softly. "I pity you, Tom. I wish I could have made it right for you, but I wasn't able to, and even if you kill us all, you'll never be more than you are, only a piece of a dead man's soul, forever searching for the rest of you. They're all gone, Tom. All the other Horcruxes are gone, and nothing you do will ever bring them back. You do not know what I am capable of," hisses Tom, his eyes flashing red. "You know the theory, Percy. Magic can neither be created nor destroyed. My soul is out there, and I can call it back to me." Percy laughs weakly. "Magic," he concedes, "but not souls. Souls are something else entirely." "Everything is magic," Tom cries out. "Everything is magic, and magic is nothing but power and will." Percy gives the barest hint of a shrug. "You're wrong," he says, gasping around a surge of pain as Tom pulls harder on his magic and the magic of the Dark Lord's followers. "Souls aren't magic, and you'll never get yours back." "You know nothing of souls, Percy," hisses Tom spitefully. "You know nothing of magic and nothing of power. When you die, you shan't leave a single ripple in this world. You understand that, don't you?" "I know more about souls than you, Tom." Percy spares a glance at Harry, who hangs unmovingly in the air, watching in silence. Their eyes meet, and Percy thinks implausibly of his mother, of Myrtle, of Severus, of everyone who had given him the strength not to die until the proper time. There is one thing left to do before Percy will give his soul up to the Dementors and be at rest. But will he have the strength for it? I know about souls because I know about regret and love and everything in between. You know nothing, Tom snarls, and Percy steels himself, searches for the familiar feeling of his own soul and the familiar resonance of Tom's soul against his, and pulls them both into his soul without a glimmer of hesitation. Except he misjudges, and for an extended second they dip into the sliver of soul that Tom has left, and Percy finds to his surprise and horror that it is not Hogwarts, not like the soul that Tom designed for himself when he had the power to do so. Tom's soul is a cold, snowy day, and they are in a graveyard, and Tom is very young, staring blankly at a tombstone, in a threadbare jacket, and wearing only socks. The sky is oppressively dark, too dark for a normal sky, and there is a large rift in it, like a galaxy or a tear in a blanket, and millions of stars seem to be rushing toward it as streaks in the sky. The snow is cold and biting, and Percy flinches from the impact as snowflakes land viciously on his skin, and all around him the wind howls in an eerie echo of that horrid monotone chanting from the wild elemental caves. Tom's soul is lonely. It is so incredibly lonely that Percy finds that he is crying silently. It is lonely, and it is torn, and it is broken, and Percy senses instinctively that Tom's soul is angry, angry at himself, for it was nothing more than Tom's own ambition that tore a rent in the sky and allowed the essence of his being to trickle out in an endless stream. "Oh, Tom," Percy says sadly, "I am so sorry." The small Tom looks up and glares at Percy with such fervor that Percy takes a step back. "Go away." "Tom, go away," Tom screams, and with a lurch they too are pulled toward the rift in the sky, sliding out of Tom's soul. Percy reaches again for the feeling of home, of the central tenets of his being, of the part of him that is always him, regardless of his form, and this time they land in his own soul, and all is suddenly quiet. They are oddly in Myrtle's bathroom, or rather right outside, the hallway lit with the slanted, golden afternoon light, still and silent like a large, empty cathedral. The silence is like a balm for Percy, who pants nervously, collecting his breath. "What is this magic?" Tom says nervously. He's back to his proper age. As Percy's breath returns to him, Percy becomes aware that he can still feel the sharp sting of his magic draining away from him and the tempting exhaustion of oblivion. Not yet, he tells himself firmly, and forces his attention back to Tom, who looks frightened. "What have you done?" "Part of your soul lived here," Percy says quietly, "or at least visited. I kept him safe, though I did not always know what I was doing." He hesitates. "Did you see where we just were?" "An illusion. Tom, you've hurt yourself nearly beyond repair," Percy says pleadingly. "You cannot go on like this. Your soul, Tom, it's nearly destroyed." "You dare say such a thing? It is the truth, Tom," Percy thunders, surprising them both into silence. In a quieter voice, he continues. "Please, Tom, promise me that you will try and heal your soul. It's your only chance. I'll help. I'll stay by your side as long as it takes." Tom, to Percy's surprise, does not turn angrily on him, nor try to curse him, nor fly on him in a violent rage. Instead, he stands very still, a lost expression on his face, and asks, an echo of the question he'd asked this morning, "Why?" And this time Percy can answer it. He can feel his body weakening. They do not have very much time left. What advantage is there to be gained by continuing to lie to himself, to Tom? "Because I loved you," he says simply. "I loved you even though you were always using me for your own gains. Merlin helped me, but I did." "Percy," Tom tries to say tenderly, moving toward him. And here there is no intoxicating spike of Tom's magic, and Percy feels strangely like he sees everything clearly. "Percy, I do care for you deeply." Percy shakes his head. "You don't believe me, do you? You saw your own soul dying, and you don't believe me." "It's magic," Tom insists, his harsh words belying the tender air he had been striving for just seconds earlier. "Power. There is no power I do not know, Percy. You're being weak when I need you to be strong. I do not need to be fixed, Percy. I have done nothing wrong." "Souls are weak," Percy says sadly, a resigned feeling of understanding beginning to swell by his feet, as if he were Myrtle, causing the water on the floor to pool. "They change form so easily. They split, so perhaps they grow too. There's much I still don't know, much I'll never know. Percy, why is it that we can bring magic from the universe into our own bodies, with nothing more than our own will?" Percy shakes his head, feeling an incredulous laugh bubble up inside him. He feels again like he is drowning, yet he can see so clearly through the shimmering waves. Why can we do that, but we cannot change the parameters of our own soul? Why is that I can walk through my soul, yet if I move my hand through the air, I can feel yours all around us? Why is that, Tom? Why are we linked like this? Percy, you have to trust me, but something has caught Percy's interest on the wall behind Tom. Their bodies will lie in the chamber forever, written in dripping red ink. Not hers, theirs. You were going to kill me, he realizes suddenly. Perhaps he had always known. You were going to use me to bring yourself back to life. No, you would have needed more magic than a first or second year, even 4 of them, Percy thinks out loud. Something had been odd about the whole affair even then, but he hadn't listened as his instincts clanged at him. You would have needed my magic, magic you recognized, magic you had helped to hone. You lied to me, Tom. You lied to me, Tom snaps back, bristling. You just said my Horcruxes were destroyed, but you said you took a vow not to harm them. Oh, Tom, Percy says, turning pitying eyes on Tom, who suddenly looks so much smaller here, so much more real. I have always told you the truth. He walks by Tom and into Myrtle's bathroom, which looks so familiar to him that it burns a little. Tom joins him, and they stand silently together, staring at the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets, where so much had started for them, where so much could have been different. Will you be able to do what needs to be done when it comes down to it? I meant what I said earlier, Percy says quietly. When he turns to look at Tom, he sees to his utmost surprise that Tom looks frightened of him, and that it almost looks like his eyes are glimmering with the beginnings of tears. It must be another tactic, an attempt to elicit sympathy from Percy, and Percy steels his heart against it. I wish that your own life had been enough for you. I wish I had been enough for you. I tried, Tom. I tried so hard to be enough for you. Maybe you are, says Tom desperately, perhaps guessing at Percy's intentions. Perhaps you can be. I'll keep you alive. You'll be by my side. You are an incomplete soul, Percy says sadly. He catches Tom's gaze and holds it, knowing it is for the last time. It feels like water is lapping at his head now, nearly covering him entirely. Do you regret it, Tom, knowing what you do now? Knowing what we could have shared had you been content with a mortal life? Tom stares back at him with wide, hungry eyes, and Percy reads the truth in them as easily as everything else he's learned to read about Tom. I'm sorry, Percy says, and he takes a step forward so that they are very close, and this time it is he who leans forward, he who presses his lips against Tom, he who breathes in the familiar glacial scent of Tom's magic, he who feels the heavy buzzing of their souls melding together. He who feels the sharp pang of agony as he tries to make their lives fit together in a way they will never be able to. Not these versions of them, not here, not like this. Not when they are 2 planets on their own separate trajectories, destined to intersect for one fleeting second before continuing, alone, for the rest of eternity. When he steps back, the expression on Tom's face wrenches at something in Percy's chest, but it is also very familiar, even though Percy could never have imagined it from Tom. Percy looks at the way that light slants through the glass windows. Matching bathrooms, Percy, says Myrtle. Your mind is remarkable, says McGonagall. You and I understand what it means to have a duty, he tells Severus, who prepares for him a bowl steaming with unsaid cares. We will do what must be done. A candle appears between Tom and Percy, a long-stemmed white candle like the ones that floated above their head at every evening feast, and both of their eyes are drawn to it and what it represents. It thrums with Percy's soul, with his magic, and with a final effort Percy reaches for the familiar vibration of Tom's soul and wraps its energy around the slender white wax. It's just like blowing out a candle. Thank you, says Percy, and he finds to his surprise that he can smile. You've changed my life, and I thank you for it. Percy drinks in the sight of Tom for the last time, thinking of all the versions of Tom that he has known. Laughing Tom, cursing Tom, pacing Tom, Tom with vulnerability real or pretend, Tom with anger and happiness and hope and disappointment, Tom in all his vivid moods, more real and piercing than anyone else Percy has ever known, and mourning each in turn. It all could have been different. Perhaps in a third life he would have been able to live with grace, rather than merely dying with it, but he supposes he'll never know. He only has these seconds, these last seconds of his life. There's power in a dying wish, you know. Goodbye, Tom, Percy says, and leaning forward, He blows out the candle and wishes with all his heart, and with Tom's anguished scream echoing in his ears, the world goes dark.